I joined first year in 1998, the University of Nairobi, Parklands campus. So we studied in Parklands in terms of classes, but slept in main campus. So I first met Focus through the campus staff who used to come to visit students. And then once I joined the worship team, I went to Focus Center for a training for the worship team.
For the worship team?
Worship team training. And then now, of course, after that, then got to meet our training secretary. And since then, I was always in CU leadership. From since then, then I had a lot of interactions with Focus.
And when you were having the informal conversation, you mentioned that Focus has influenced a lot of what you do now. But before we get there, now that you started with just saying when you were in the CU and how you met Focus, what if somebody were to ask what you do, how would you describe your job now?
So I work in the NGO sector in the area of cancer control. So I'm a lawyer by profession, but my current job involves capacity building. So in essence, I train government lawyers on how to pass cancer control laws. By cancer control laws, we mean laws regulating cancer-causing substances like tobacco, alcohol, and unhealthy food. So I work for an Australian NGO, and we train lawyers who work in government on how to translate UN conventions and WHO documents in these areas into laws for their countries.
Okay. And so ideally you're training, it's advocacy. And
so I started out as a typical NGO job, so lobbying for laws in Kenya. So we founded an NGO that worked with members of parliament to pass private member bills. So one of the first ones we did was a Tobacco Control Act in this country, and this was in 2004. And then I ran that NGO for 6 years, and then I got a job at the regional level, working to support civil society. So basically we're giving out grants to civil society to lobby in their countries. And then now this job then that I have, where now I've switched to training government lawyers. So I've spanned the whole realm of advocacy. Yes.
All of it. So let's now go back to you joining first year.
Yes.
Were you a Christian then?
Yes, I've been a Christian at least since standard 7.
Okay.
Yes. So I got born again around standard 7 in primary school. And then in high school, I was not really active in the CU, but I used to teach Sunday school. And then, of course, now when I joined campus, then I was very active in the Christian Union.
So you joined campus already a Christian, went looking for the Christian Union when you joined campus?
Yes. So as I said, because we lived in main campus, we attended fellowship in main campus because that's where we slept. But because the Christian Union was very active in terms of trying to engage first years, we soon discovered there was also a Christian Union in campus. So we would stay then for the Christian Union on Friday in Parklands, and then attend Christian Union on the other side in main campus. And then of course church we used to split between main and Parklands.
Okay. And you also mentioned you encountered Focus when you went for a training as a member of the worship team. And do you remember the first conference you attended organized by Focus?
So actually my first Focus conference would have been kind of, I'm not sure whether it was an associates conference. This was in Uganda. So that brought, I think, students from all over plus associates. So we were invited to join the Kenyan contingent. And I think at that time was just in second year. So I was very impressed that they bothered with me as a second year student. Of course, all expenses paid to Uganda. No one could have turned down a trip like that. And then, as I said, because I engaged fairly frequently with our training secretary and our campus staff. But then now after that, I would have attended, I think, one commission when I was still in campus. Commission 2000. No, then Commission 2000 found me after I'd graduated. But I remember in that commission, I was, actually my first commission was when I was a campus staff. So I was also helping to put together the choir and the worship team for commission. And then of course as a campus staff, then you had other duties around commission.
what would you say was the biggest impact Commission had on your life those early years?
So I think was just clarifying for me that mission was not just the traditional evangelism. So while I had done my year as a campus staff, which is the more traditional, campus ministry and evangelism, I'd also attended an associates conference. And so at that associates conference, they focused more on, I guess you could call it the social gospel. And so even at Commission, you have got some of the more traditional topics around evangelism and missions, but then you also had this other side of mission, which was basically engaging society. So I think for me it clarified, because as you can see from my career, I started the traditional lawyer route of going to court, and then I've branched into a whole different thing. And so just clarifying for me in my mind that God is as much to be found in the church and the mission field as is to be found in the workplace. And so for me, just clarifying the whole role of workplace as a mission field, and how then one can use their profession as their mission field. And I guess I've been doing that then for the next 18 years.
For the last
18 years.
And I think that's one of the challenges people continue to experience. And I don't know what you would speak into the workplace and profession as a mission field. Does that just involve, excellence at work? Being honest, being accountable with money and things like that, as we would mention it? Or does it then also involve the aspect of proclamation, evangelism at work? How do you balance? So
for me, I think is looking at work as not just a job, because a job is what you do from 8 to 5 to earn a salary. Work for me is what you use to change the world. And I think that's what God intended it to be. And so when you look at your work as a mission field, then the work must be transformational. Now, some things may look more transformational than others. So for example, when you change a law, it transforms a whole country. But then I think the challenge to the Christian who works in, say, a field not like advocacy, is how then do you see what you're doing as changing the world? Because when we were put here, we were told to be stewards, and not just to be stewards, to dominate, to exercise dominion. So how do you exercise dominion over the field that you have been given? So that if you're a teacher, you're not just teaching students, you're changing the world one student at a time. And if you then look at your work that way, then what do you need to do to that student so that when they come out, the world has changed? So then it's not just teaching ABC or teaching 1, 2, 3. It is molding somebody that's going to come out and change the world. And so if then you're a businessman, as you sell those things, how are you creating transformation? So that you're not just selling bread and milk, for example, but there's a way in which you're changing the world. And once you look at it that way, then what kind of change are you bringing? It's a kind of change that God wants to see in the world.
What can a student on campus begin doing now that prepares them for that position when it comes beyond their campus step?
So I would probably say, and this may not be the best advice, that I was probably a 50% student. Luckily, I got grades that were better than 50%. So what I mean by being a 50% student, one, I was a student leader, and so in student politics. So I was a class rep for the 4 years I was at Parklands. I was a student leader for 1 year, actually as a first year. I was vice chair of the Kenya Law Student Society, and because of that I was involved in a lot of stuff around campus that was not academic. Then of course I was a CU leader all the way from first year up to 4th year in various dockets. So worship team and many other dockets that I held. And so in addition to which then I was very active in clubs in campus. And so what that does is that in addition to the academics, of course I still went to class and still had to sit and do exams, but it gave me a broad appreciation of the world and what needed changing. And so when now you couple that, as I'm saying, with understanding that then you're an agent of transformation and God expects you to impact your society around you. So it's not about you. It's about the world around you and how you can change that. So for me as a legal student, it was doing moot courts, it was legal aid, it was things like that. So still related to my career, but not necessarily just focused on me, my academics and passing. And so my message to students is that there's a world outside the campus and there's another world inside the campus that needs to be transformed. And so beyond studies and typical CU, just praying and so on, there must be other things that you can do. And so some of the things, for example, what kind of jobs do you get during the holidays? So of course I know many CUs are going on mission and that kind of thing, and we need to do them. But then there are also small jobs that you can get. So I remember in second year joining the Christian Lawyers Fellowship in Mombasa and working at their legal aid clinic. This exposed me to the prisons, it exposed me to cases of rape and defilement. So it showed me that there was a world outside of the traditional law practice, a world that needed things like justice. And so law is about justice. Not all justice is gotten in the courts. There's some other justice that needs to be gotten outside. What kind of internships do you get if you can get them? Where do you volunteer during the holidays? Because all of that is part of the academic experience. So not only does it help in terms of building work experience for getting a job, but it shows you God's world, what is wrong with that world, and what needs to change in that world. And so it helps to build passion for a cause. It helps to build experience and knowledge, and it helps you to build compassion, because ultimately the heart of mission is compassion. Yeah. And so when Jesus said that he saw sheep without a shepherd, and that concerned him, which are the sheep that you're supposed to be ministering to? How will you find them? Because they are not necessarily found within the classroom. Yet in campus, there are several lost sheep wandering around. And so not just lost in the sense of they need to be born again, they are lost because they have got other problems. And so exposing yourself to all of that while you're still in campus, because you've got 4 years, both in class and then you've got holidays. What do you do with that time? And so when I look at myself now, obviously the exposure that Focus gave me in all of these trainings that I attended, all the conferences I got to attend, most importantly also the people that I met, because I was now mingling with older Christians, people who are out of campus, both in my profession and elsewhere, which then all helped to build the kind of person that I am today.
And I wanted to just ask, you alluded to it as you're finishing on that point, on how Focus helped you to be a better student and a better leader, because then you're involved in non-CU leadership positions and not necessarily directly linked to the CU activities and working with the Christian lawyers like you mentioned. How did Focus prepare you to be a different kind of a leader?
So I think for me the biggest impact would be STEM and the year right after STEM, because I attended my first Focus Associates conference during STEM. And the challenge in terms of what we discuss at these associates conferences is how can we use our profession to give back to the society. And so initially when I joined law school, I wanted to be the traditional kind of lawyer. Now I'm not saying we don't need those, but for me the change came that when after pupillage, I took 1 year off to go into student ministry. My current boss couldn't understand it. He couldn't understand, how do you leave a law firm to say you're going to work with university students? And even worse, you're not going to be paid. You're going to have to raise your own money. So you're leaving paid employment to go and fundraise. He couldn't understand that. And then after that, attending a Focus Associates conference and starting to ask myself, why did I study law? Why did God call me into this profession? And starting to realize that I was being called away from the traditional into law that would have more impact in terms of what God wanted me to do. And so following that Focus Associates conference where we're talking about lobbying and advocacy, that is what set my feet on the advocacy path. And just knowing that God had told me that there are many things you can do with a law degree, and this is what I want you to do with yours. So had I never done STEM, and had I never attended my first Focus Associates conference, I would have been a traditional kind of lawyer, going to court because I was working in a law firm. I would never have thought of going into advocacy. There still is no degree called Bachelor of Advocacy. So there's Bachelor of Law, there's Bachelor of Science, there's Bachelor of Medicine, but there's no Bachelor of Advocacy. And so what is then going to put you in the path of advocacy or the road less traveled? I think for me that's what Focus did. So it showed me there was a world outside of the courtroom and a world that God wanted me to change. Yeah.
This commission that we are going into in the next 30 days, focuses on the running theme is the gospel transforming a dynamic world. And you have indeed mentioned there's a lot of dynamics in the world, a lot of not just people who need to be saved, but sheep who are lost in many ways and many other issues that commission will be addressing. But I want you to speak into the matter of the gospel. Because if the gospel is going to transform the dynamic world, one, it means we need to understand the right gospel. How do you see the gospel as being necessary? How do you see being rooted in the right kind of doctrine and gospel as necessary?
So one of the things that focus shapes is your worldview, because depending on your worldview determines your behavior.
Yeah.
And so part of worldview, 1 is your convictions, 2 are your values, and then 3 is, I guess you could call it your philosophy. And so the gospel talks about everything. It talks about money, it talks about poverty, it talks about corruption, it talks about leadership, it talks about education, it talks about health. So it's relevant to everything that we are facing. And so part of the challenge with Christians is that, I guess you'd call it, they don't have a proper theology. And so one of the things that Commission will do for people, and generally all the focus conferences, is that it starts building that theology in you. And so looking at theology beyond just the doctrine of salvation, to then what does the Bible say about all of these things? And so when we are taught to rightfully handle the Word of God, so that when you go through things like inductive Bible study, you go through hermeneutics, all of which focus will train you in, so that then as you read your Bible, you can then see what is God saying about the situation that I am in. So that for me, in the field that I am in, what are the things that God advocates for? So that if I say I'm going to go into advocacy, what can I advocate for and what can't I? So for example, I could never advocate for abortion. It's advocacy in the world's sense, but it's not God's kind of advocacy. What does God want me to advocate about? Equally, if you're a teacher, God says something about the function of education. When he says train a child in the way he should go and he'll depart from it, who are the ones doing training if not teachers? So what does God say then about the teaching profession? If you're a doctor, what does God say about healing? What does he say about the well-being of people? Therefore then, how does that influence, even as you're treating patients, what the ultimate aim of treatment is? And so when you build that theology, which then is borne out in how you live your day-to-day life, so at the immediate level, it will affect your character and your personal behavior, but eventually it affects how you engage with the world. And so you start off with, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be a good worker, because God expects people to work well for the employer. But then from there it will go to then, what is God saying about my world? So that then when you're a teacher in a school and you see that there are children without shoes, what does God say about that? So beyond teaching them their ABCs, what is he saying? When he says train a child in the way they should go, what then is your role as a teacher who's the trainer? And so once you get exposed to proper theology, and so going beyond the current theologies of prosperity, which is still all about you, I want to be richer so that I can be better. And you then move to, I need my society to be better, because when the society is better, then I'm also better. And so God is not just interested in your personal prosperity, which he is interested in, but is interested in his world's prosperity, which is why then we are told to dominate the world and change it and transform it. So once you have that your theology correct, then it can be applied to every area that you're involved in.
The Fellowship of Christian Unions, reaching students, changing nations.